Hi there, Robbie. So, today we're going to talk about, or you're going to talk about protein standardization and why it's an important part of dairy optimization. Would you mind taking us through that now?
Yeah. Hi, Hamish. Thanks for having me. This follows on from when you were talking about time-varying BOMs in our previous video. And why we have time-varying BOMs is because day-to-day, site-to-site, the input into our factories, the raw milk changes. And the output, our powders, our butter, our cheese remains the same. So we need to account for the changes in the input, but the consistent output. And one of the ways that we deal with this changing input is through protein standardization. So what we're effectively talking about here is taking the input, making it into a standard consistency so that we can achieve our output specification. And our output specification is usually defined by codex, which will say, for skim milk powder, for example, how much protein, how much lactose, how much ash, etc. needs to be in the product for it to be called that. As our input varies, but our output is constant, what we in effect are doing is bringing everything into a standard, into a standardized input, and that is our protein standardization. So how we achieve it is we put our raw milk into a factory and we immediately separate out the cream. The cream is consistent, it's 40% fat, we know what it is. We add it back into the process as and when necessary, so we either turn it into butter, cheese, or we add it back with protein to make whole milk powder. Our protein stream, though, this is where the variability really comes in. Depending on the time of the year, the type of cows, the type of feed, the percentage of protein in this liquid stream can vary greatly. And this is where we add our lactose or permeate to standardize that level of protein. So when we think about our farming systems, we generally kind of think of farming in two ways. We have pasture-based and feed-based. Now, our pasture-based farming systems typically generate milk that has lower fat content and a higher protein content. When we have this higher protein content, we need to dilute it. So we add additional lactose or permeate, and this is our protein standardization. Conversely, if we're in a farming system that's heavily dependent on soy, corn, other feed sources rather than grass, rather than pasture, we typically have a lower percentage of protein, and we need to extract additional lactose or permeates, ash, etc. from our mix to bring our protein up to the required level. So why protein standardization is super important is when we don't do it, we have an inconsistent product. And in the case of pasture-based systems, we actually would be supplying more protein than what is considered to be in the product. So we in effect would be giving away value, as protein is where the value is generated. So the idea being that we dilute our product back down into the acceptable specification, and by diluting it, we get more product and thus can generate more value. What we also typically tend to see because of this, this need for pasture-based systems to consume lactose and feed-based systems to produce additional lactose, we find that the global trade flows similarly. Those who don't need it sell it to those who do need it. And this also links in that the systems that typically have higher fat content in their milk tend to be systems that produce more cheese. For example, the US is a huge cheese producer, more so focused on cheese than proteins, and consequently they're a big lactose generator. New Zealand, for example, is a relatively small cheese producer when compared to how much protein it makes through skim and whole milk powder, and thus it is a big lactose consumer. So the idea of protein standardization is building on the idea of time-varying BOMs. It's the process by which we take a different recipe, a different input, and standardize that so we can get the same output.
Thanks, Robbie. And like the other thing that should be sort of thought about there too is that it enables our customers to run their process consistently, because if the protein was varying in the skim pommet powder, it would change the functionality and potentially the flavour of their finished goods. So it's not just a case of dairy processors doing it to maximise return. There's also benefits in there for the customer. So thanks for that, Robbie. That's another webinar from Utterly Understandable. Did you have any other final comments, Robbie, before we wrap up?
No, but I think that is a really good call out, in that, by having a standardized product, customers, end users know exactly what they're getting and thus know how they can further refine and process into their end goods or consume as is. So it's about consistency.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining, and we'll be back next week with another topic.